The sun had barely risen, but the city already trembled. Dust rose from the horizon, carried by a wind that seemed to warn of the coming storm. From the distance, a deep, rhythmic pounding grew louder. At first, the villagers thought it might be a herd of wild animals. Then the sound became unmistakable, the thunder of thousands of hooves moving with terrifying precision. People ran into the streets, clutching their children and possessions, their eyes wide with fear. Mothers called for sons and husbands. Men tried to organize defenses, but the panic spread faster than any orders could. The city gates, once symbols of safety and protection, now seemed like fragile barriers against an unstoppable tide. From the walls, the guards could see them, Mongol horsemen riding in perfect formation, their banners fluttering in the wind. They were fast, disciplined, and ruthless. No one could outrun them. No one could hide. The villagers had heard stories of what the Mongols did when they came. Entire towns wiped out, men killed, women taken, families torn apart. Inside a small home near the edge of the city, a young girl named Lale clutched her mother's hand. Her heart pounded as her father tried to calm her. "Stay close, Lale. Don't make a sound. Don't run," he whispered. But even his words could not hide the fear in his own voice. Lale could feel it in the shaking of his hands. Outside, the Mongols reached the city walls. Arrows rained down from above, striking anyone who moved too quickly. The defenders fought bravely, but they were no match for the cavalry that seemed to come from every direction at once. The city gates buckled under the first charge. Screams echoed as soldiers were cut down and the first houses were set on fire. Men tried to fight back. Some formed small groups, hoping to protect their families. Others ran, seeking shelter in alleys or basements. But the Mongols were relentless. There was no mercy for men. Those who surrendered were often killed or taken as forced labor. Those who resisted were slaughtered without hesitation. The sound of swords clashing, the cries of the wounded, and the roar of the hooves created a chaos that seemed impossible to survive. But the men's fate was only part of the horror. Women faced a different kind of terror. They were not killed immediately, at least not always. Young women, especially virgins, were captured and taken by the Mongols. They were highly valued, not simply as rewards for warriors, but as tools of power and control. Families watched helplessly as daughters, sisters, and wives were dragged away. Mothers screamed, and children clung to empty arms, crying for someone who could never return. Lale and her mother were among the captured. They were herded into a group of women and girls, their faces pale and bodies trembling. A Mongol soldier grabbed her mother roughly, shouting something in a language they could not understand. The women were forced to march, step by step, toward a camp outside the city. There, the Mongols decided their fates. Some would become concubines, some would be traded, some forced into marriages with warriors they had never met. Others would be sent to work as slaves. The psychological terror was almost unbearable. Lale could not comprehend what was happening. She had been told stories of brave warriors and proud families, but now In the face of the Mongols' arrival, all of that seemed meaningless. Her mother's tears fell silently onto her shoulders, and for the first time, Lale realized that safety and freedom were gone forever. This was not just random cruelty. Historical records from Persian and Chinese chroniclers show that the Mongols used these tactics deliberately. By taking women from conquered cities, they shattered family bonds, humiliated enemies, and ensured loyalty through fear and submission. Every captured woman was a reminder to the survivors of what could happen if they resisted. Some women were even used as human shields, placed at the front lines of future battles to deter rebellion. In the camp outside the city, Lale saw other girls and women, many no older than herself. Some clung to each other, whispering prayers. Others stared silently, their eyes empty, as if hope had already left them. The Mongols moved among them, selecting, judging, and assigning their fates with ruthless efficiency. There was no negotiation, no appeal, no chance of returning home. The girls had become property, tools in a war they could never understand. Lale's mind raced. Could her father be alive? Her brothers? Could they be fighting or dead? She did not know, and that uncertainty was a torment that cut deeper than hunger or thirst. Every step forward, every command from the Mongols reminded her that life as she had known it was gone. Night fell, but the terror did not end. Fires from the city lit the sky, casting an eerie glow over the camp. She could hear soldiers laughing, shouting, and arguing. She could hear women weeping in distant tents, and she could feel the cold, harsh reality pressing in that there would be no return. Survival would require adaptation, obedience, and courage she had never imagined she needed. Even as she shivered in fear, Lale noticed something. Among the captives, some girls tried to support each other. A small hand would reach for another, a quiet word would offer comfort. In the midst of horror, there was still a spark of humanity. It was faint, almost invisible, but it reminded her that even in the darkest moments, hope could exist. As the first night in captivity passed, Lale understood one terrible truth. The Mongols' conquest was not just about land or riches, it was about control. It was about breaking people, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, and socially. By taking women, by destroying families, by making the conquered completely dependent, the Mongols ensured that their power would be absolute. And yet, as Lale lay on the cold ground, listening to the distant sounds of the Mongol camp, a small, stubborn thought entered her mind. If she could survive, if she could endure, then maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to live through this nightmare. The thunder of hooves had passed for now, but the echo remained in her heart, a reminder that life in the world ruled by the Mongols would never be the same again. The city was no longer the place Lale had known. Smoke rose from burning houses, and the air smelled of ash, blood, and fear. The streets were empty of the familiar sounds of life. No children laughing, no merchants calling out their goods. Only cries, whispers, and the occasional shout of Mongol soldiers broke the silence. Men were rounded up first.
Those who had tried to fight were already dead or lying wounded in the streets. The survivors were told to kneel, their hands bound, their eyes downcast. Some were forced to march with the Mongol army, taken far from home to labor in fields, fortresses, or construction projects. Others were killed outright. The choice was cruelly simple: obey or die. There was no mercy, no negotiation, no hope. Among the men, Laleh noticed her father. He tried to shield those around him, trying to be brave for his family. But even his strength was no match for the Mongols' orders. Soldiers separated fathers from sons, brothers from brothers. Some men fought, hoping to protect their families, but it was hopeless. In moments, the streets were filled with death, screams, and despair. Women, however, faced a different horror. They were not killed immediately, but that was no comfort. Mothers clutched their daughters, sisters held hands, wives searched desperately for their husbands. But the Mongols moved quickly, separating families, selecting girls and young women for their own purposes. Laleh and her mother were among those taken. The captives were not treated as humans. They were property, prizes of war. The Mongols valued virgins highly. They were distributed among warriors, sometimes forced into marriage, sometimes kept as concubines, sometimes sent to labor in harsh conditions. Every woman was a tool of control. The conquerors knew that by taking women, they could break the spirit of their enemies. Fathers, brothers, and husbands would feel the pain of their family's suffering more sharply than their own injuries. Laleh's mother tried to comfort her, whispering that they must stay strong, but even she could not hide the terror in her eyes. They were herded into a group of captives, marched toward tents and fenced areas where others had already been taken. The reality sunk in with each step. Their lives, as they had known them, were gone. The Mongols did not just take women for their own pleasure. Historical records show a clear purpose behind these acts. By destroying family structures, humiliating the defeated, and forcing integration, the Mongols maintained control over the people they conquered. Women were used to send a message. Resistance was futile, and the cost of disobedience was unbearable. Some were even sent ahead in future battles, human shields meant to protect the soldiers while reminding enemies of the Mongols' power. As they walked, Laleh saw other women and girls, some crying silently, others with faces hardened by shock. She tried to imagine what had happened to their families. Were their fathers alive, brothers, husbands? Every face told a story of loss, fear, and despair. Yet even in the darkest moments, a few whispered words of encouragement, offering comfort in ways that were small but precious. Laleh began to understand the full horror of her situation. Life for men and women under the Mongols was cruel, but the suffering was different. Men might die quickly or endure forced labor, but women faced a slow, ongoing torment. Their freedom was stolen, their dignity stripped away, and their very existence became a tool of war. The pain was not just physical, it was psychological, social, and spiritual. The night fell, and the captives were confined in the Mongol camp. Fires from torches and distant city ruins lit the area, casting flickering shadows on terrified faces. Laleh huddled close to her mother, listening to the sounds of other women weeping and whispering prayers. The Mongols patrolled, occasionally selecting someone for labor or a warrior's camp. Every moment brought uncertainty, and every sound could mean further separation or punishment. In the darkness, Laleh reflected on what she had witnessed. Men had been slaughtered or forced into grueling work. Women had been taken and used as instruments of power. Families had been destroyed, communities shattered, and the social order overturned. The Mongols had not only conquered a city, they had conquered its people, reshaping lives and futures with terrifying efficiency. Yet despite the fear, there was still something fragile and human in the camp. A young girl shared her bread with an older woman. Mothers whispered stories to their daughters, trying to keep hope alive. These small acts were faint sparks against the overwhelming darkness, but they reminded Laleh that survival required more than strength. It required courage, resilience, and the determination to endure. By the end of that night, Laleh understood one thing clearly. Surrender had not brought safety. Her city had fallen, her family had been torn apart, and her life had been forever changed. The Mongols' power was absolute, their methods brutal, and their strategy merciless. Men faced death or labor. Women faced enslavement, forced marriages, and exploitation. Every step, every decision by the conquerors was designed to break the spirit of the conquered. And yet, even in despair, Laleh felt a small flicker of determination. She would have to endure. She would have to survive, for herself, for her mother, and for the hope that one day, even in the world ruled by Mongols, she might find a way to live and retain some piece of her old life. The city was gone. The streets were silent. The fires burned on the horizon. But the echo of fear, pain, and loss would stay with Laleh forever, and with millions like her who had faced the Mongols' unstoppable power.
The morning after the city fell was cold and gray. Smoke rose in thick clouds from the ruins, carrying the bitter scent of burnt wood and blood. The streets were empty, littered with debris, broken carts, and the remnants of lives that had ended in chaos. The once bustling city now felt like a tomb, silent except for the occasional shout of a Mongol soldier or the distant wail of someone mourning. Laleh and her mother had been moved from the city gates to a large fenced enclosure. Hundreds of women and girls were gathered there, each one trembling, each face etched with fear. The Mongols walked through the group, assessing, choosing, and assigning fates with a cold precision that left no room for hope. Some girls were led away immediately, their cries echoing long after they disappeared behind tents. Others were pushed roughly toward a line of soldiers, their future already decided. Laleh's mother held her hand tightly, whispering words of comfort that seemed almost meaningless. "Stay quiet, Laleh. Obey, and we will survive," she murmured. But even in her voice, Laleh heard the shaking of despair. Around them, other women whispered prayers or sobbed silently, some so stunned that they barely moved. The air was thick with fear,
with the kind of dread that settles deep in the chest and never leaves. The Mongols valued young virgins above all else. These girls were not just captives, they were prizes, tools of control, and weapons of psychological warfare. Some would be married to Mongol warriors they had never seen. Others would serve as concubines in camps or homes far from their families. Others were assigned to labor, carrying loads, working fields, or performing menial chores under constant supervision. Each choice was deliberate. The Mongols knew that by taking women, they could destroy family structures, humiliate the defeated, and secure loyalty through fear. Layli watched as soldiers pulled a young girl from the group. She was only a few years older than Layli, her face pale and eyes wide with terror. Her mother tried to step forward, but a Mongol shoved her aside. The girl screamed, but no one could hear her cries over the noise of the camp. Within moments, she was gone, disappearing behind a tent. The sight filled Layli with a cold dread she could not shake. As the day wore on, Layli was herself taken to a tent filled with other girls. They were all from different villages, different cities, but they shared the same fear, the same uncertainty, the same helplessness. Some had witnessed their fathers or brothers killed. Others had been dragged from homes they had lived in all their lives. There were girls who had traveled for days, separated from their families, carrying nothing but memories and despair. The Mongols were methodical. There was no chaos in their cruelty, only calculation. By taking families and controlling women, they sent a clear message. Resistance was useless, and the conqueror's power was absolute. Some women were sent ahead of battles as human shields. Others were married off to warriors as a mark of prestige. Each action reinforced their dominance. Layli struggled to comprehend it all. Could she resist? Could she escape? The Mongols were everywhere, mounted on horses, patrolling the camp, or moving quickly on foot. The fences around the enclosure were high and patrolled. Every escape attempt would mean certain death. Resistance could mean immediate punishment, or worse, the death of someone she cared about. Obedience was the only option, but even obedience was no guarantee of safety or mercy. Among the captives, small gestures of humanity persisted. A girl shared a piece of bread with a younger child. Mothers whispered stories to their daughters to keep fear at bay. Some older women offered guidance, teaching the younger ones how to avoid angering the soldiers. These small acts, almost invisible in the sea of terror, were like sparks in the dark, fragile but alive. They reminded Layli that survival required not just endurance, but also the courage to maintain some piece of herself, some spark of hope. Layli's thoughts returned constantly to her mother. Had she survived the separation? Was she safe? The Mongol system of control meant that families were almost always broken apart, with captives scattered across vast distances. Fathers, brothers, and husbands were killed, enslaved, or marched away. Women were deliberately separated to ensure the conqueror's dominance. Each time Layli wondered about her family, a cold weight settled in her chest. By midday, the tent became suffocating. The air was thick with smoke from nearby fires and the scent of bodies pressed together. Girls whispered quietly to each other, sharing rumors or memories of home. One whispered that she had heard of girls taken to a neighboring village, married to warriors who had some rank and influence. Another warned that some captives were sent further east, never to return. Layli listened, trying to memorize every detail, every hint, as if it could somehow help her survive. Even as fear pressed down on them, the Mongols' presence was constant and unrelenting. Soldiers patrolled, shouting commands, pushing girls forward, taking others away. Every moment brought uncertainty. One wrong move, one sound, one glance could mean punishment. The psychological pressure was as heavy as the physical threat, shaping the captives into obedience before any actual orders were even given. Night fell again. The camp was lit by torches and fires, casting flickering shadows across pale, terrified faces. Layli lay on the hard ground, her body aching, her mind racing. She thought of her home, her city, her family. Could she survive this? Could she endure the days, weeks, months ahead? Even if she did, what kind of life would await her? Yet, amid despair, a small determination took root. Layli could not change what had happened. She could not undo the capture or the violence, but she could survive. She would endure, if only to keep her memories, her mind, and some part of herself intact. Even in the Mongols' brutal camp, even surrounded by fear, she resolved to cling to life. The Mongols had conquered the city, but they had not yet conquered the human spirit. And though Layli was young, frightened, and uncertain, she understood one thing clearly. Survival would require not just obedience, but courage, resilience, and the quiet defiance of hope. As the night stretched on, the distant sounds of other captives, cries, footsteps, whispers, blended with the crackle of fires. Layli lay awake, listening, feeling, and remembering. She knew the days ahead would be filled with hardship and despair, but she also knew deep down that even in captivity, even in the hands of conquerors, she could hold on to herself. And so, she waited.
The morning air in the Mongol camp was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of horses, smoke, and metal. Lael awoke on the hard ground, her body stiff and aching from the night. Around her, the other captives stirred, some whispering prayers, others silently sobbing. Fear was constant, a weight pressing on every chest, every mind. That day, the women were gathered and told to move toward the edge of the camp. Confused and trembling, Lael followed, her mother close behind. The Mongols did not speak kindly. There were no explanations, no comfort. The women were herded in silence, their eyes scanning the horizon for signs of escape, for glimpses of hope, but there was none. When they reached a clearing outside the camp, Lael saw the army forming, thousands of Mongol soldiers on horseback, their armor glinting in the sunlight, swords and bows ready. The ground shook as the cavalry moved in formation, a relentless wave of power and precision. And at the front of this formation, a group of women was arranged, young virgins, including Lael and her mother. The truth struck Lael like a cold wind. The Mongols were using them as human shields. They would be placed at the very front of the army, a barrier meant to protect the warriors from enemy attacks and to terrify anyone who might think of resisting. The strategy was cruel, calculated, and absolute. Life and death were now tools of control. Lael's mother squeezed her hand, whispering, "Stay close. Stay still, survive." But even she could not hide the fear in her own voice.
Around them, other women cried softly, holding on to each other, whispering prayers to gods who had seemed silent in the face of such horror. The Mongols gave no comfort, no reassurance. Their presence was a reminder that resistance was futile and disobedience would be punished immediately. The enemy city was in sight. From the top of the hill, Lael could see the walls, the streets, and the people. Men ready to fight, women and children huddled in fear. She realized the full purpose of the Mongols' tactic. These women, including herself, were meant to send a message. They were living proof that the Mongols could conquer not only land, but the very spirit of the people. As the army advanced, Lael felt the thrum of hooves beneath her feet, the wind whipping her hair, and the raw fear of what might come. She could hear the cries of those who had been placed in front, some stumbling, some screaming, as soldiers pushed them forward. Survival required obedience and stillness, but fear made it almost impossible to control her body. Every step, every movement could bring punishment or death. The Mongols moved with precision. Each warrior knew their role. Each formation was designed for maximum effectiveness, and the women at the front were carefully arranged, their presence both protection and terror. Lael could see the enemy archers on the city walls, aiming, preparing. Some arrows struck the ground in front of them, some narrowly missing. Each impact, each whistle of an arrow sent waves of panic through the women, yet no one could run, no one could cry out. Escape was impossible. Lael held her mother's hand tightly. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment they shared a silent promise to survive, to endure, no matter what happened next. Around them, other women were holding similar silent conversations through their eyes and gestures. Even in the most desperate circumstances, the human spirit clung to hope, small as it was. The battle began in earnest. Arrows flew, horses charged, and the sound of clashing metal filled the air. Lael pressed herself to the ground instinctively, feeling every vibration, every thrum of movement around her. The women at the front were more than shields. They were living symbols of power and control. To the Mongols, they were both tools and trophies, proof that resistance would cost the lives and dignity of those who opposed them. Despite the terror, moments of humanity emerged. A girl near Lael whispered softly to calm another child. Mothers comforted daughters, sharing what little courage they could muster. Even in the midst of war, small acts of care and compassion persisted, quiet defiance against the overwhelming force surrounding them. As the day stretched on, the women continued to march at the front. Lael realized that this ordeal would continue for days, perhaps weeks. The Mongols' strategy was not just to conquer cities, but to break the will of the people, to instill fear that would ripple far beyond the battlefield. By using women as human shields, they sent a message to anyone who might resist. Compliance was survival, defiance was death. Night fell, and the army made camp outside the conquered city. The women were allowed a brief respite, though their hands were still bound, and soldiers watched their every move. Fires illuminated the camp, casting long shadows across terrified faces. Lael's mother tried to comfort her, whispering, "We are still alive. That is enough for now." Lael nodded, clinging to the words, though her heart remained heavy with fear. Even in captivity, in the midst of unspeakable terror, Lael began to understand the nature of the Mongols' power. They did not simply conquer land, they conquered people, using fear, manipulation, and cruelty as weapons. Men were killed or forced into labor. Women were captured, controlled, and used as shields, concubines, and symbols of dominance. Every action was deliberate, every step calculated to enforce submission. And yet, even in the darkness, Lael refused to give up entirely. She clung to her mother's hand, to the whispers of other women, to the tiny sparks of hope that survived even in the most brutal circumstances. She knew that survival would require courage, patience, and resilience. The Mongols had used the women to conquer the city. They had shattered families, broken communities, and imposed fear. But they had not yet conquered the human spirit. Lael, exhausted, frightened, and small, understood that the battle was not only on the field, it was within her heart. She would endure. She would survive. And even as human shields, she and the others would hold on to the faintest glimmer of hope. The echoes of the day's terror lingered long into the night, a reminder of the Mongols' unstoppable power. Yet, in the midst of fear, Lael and the women around her realized something crucial. While the conquerors could take their freedom, their families, and their cities, they could not fully take their courage, their memory, and their determination to survive. And that thought, small and fragile though it was, gave her strength to face another day.
The days in the Mongol camp became a blur of heat, dust, and exhaustion. Lale and the other women were no longer just captives. They were part of the Mongols' system, living under strict control with every step and movement watched. The first shock of capture had passed, but it was replaced by a new reality. Life in captivity was long, grueling, and relentless. From sunrise to sunset, the women were given tasks. Some carried water or firewood. Others cleaned tents or prepared food for the soldiers. Those deemed more valuable were taken to live with warriors, serving as concubines or wives. Lale and her mother were kept together for now, but they could see the soldiers' eyes roaming over the group, choosing girls for different fates. There was no promise of kindness, only command and obedience. The psychological toll was immense. Every day, Lale watched other women break down, crying quietly in corners, whispering prayers that went unanswered, or screaming into the wind when no one could hear. Life was no longer about living freely, it was about surviving each moment, avoiding angering the Mongols, and trying not to give up entirely. Some women tried to maintain a sense of dignity. They braided hair, whispered stories to younger girls, or kept memories of home alive in small ways. But the Mongols were thorough. Every act of resistance, no matter how subtle, could bring punishment. A glance considered too bold, a whispered word, or even hesitation in a task could mean a beating, public humiliation, or separation from family members. Lale observed how the Mongols moved through the camp with purpose. Their strategy was clear: control the women to control the conquered people. By forcing them into labor, marriage, or concubinage, The Mongols disrupted family structures, destroyed social ties, and ensured obedience. The captives were reminders to the men who survived. Rebellion had a price far greater than death. At night, the women slept on the cold ground, huddled together for warmth and comfort. Lale lay awake, thinking of her father, her brothers, and the city that no longer existed. She wondered if her family had survived, or if they had already been killed or enslaved. Every thought of home brought both pain and strength, a reminder of what she had lost and why she had to survive. The camp was not safe. Even in sleep, fear was constant. Soldiers patrolled relentlessly, checking on the captives, taking some away at random, punishing others for the smallest perceived offenses. Whispers spread quickly through the group. Girls had been traded to warriors far away. Others had been taken as concubines in distant tents. Life in captivity was unpredictable, violent, and frightening. Yet, even amid terror, small acts of resistance and humanity persisted. Some women shared food or water. Others comforted the younger girls, teaching them how to obey without losing themselves entirely. Lale noticed that even when her body was exhausted and her mind fearful, her spirit refused to break completely. Survival was not just about physical endurance. It was about holding on to hope, memory, and courage, no matter how faint. Over time, the women adapted to the harsh routines. They learned which behaviors kept them safe, how to avoid punishment, and how to survive the Mongols' ever-watchful eyes. Obedience became second nature, but it was always coupled with vigilance. Every glance, every gesture was measured. Every day was a delicate balance between survival and the faint desire to remain human in a world that seemed determined to strip them of it. Lale saw how the Mongols exploited fear. By controlling the women so completely, they controlled not only them, but also the conquered cities and peoples. Families had been broken, men killed or enslaved, and communities left in despair. Through women, the Mongols enforced their dominance, ensuring that the lessons of fear and obedience spread far beyond the camp. Yet not all captives were powerless. Some women found ways to assert small freedoms. A whispered conversation here, a shared memory there, or quiet guidance to a younger girl became acts of resilience. These moments were subtle, almost invisible, but they reminded Lale that even in the darkest places, humanity could survive. Lale herself learned to endure. She kept close to her mother, observing the soldiers' moods and learning the signs of potential danger. She watched the other women, seeing patterns in their treatment, and slowly began to understand the Mongols' methods. Every punishment, every selection, every harsh command had a purpose: to enforce control, ensure obedience, and maintain absolute power. Days turned into weeks. The women's bodies grew stronger in some ways, hardened by work and fear, but their minds carried the weight of constant vigilance. Sleep came only in short bursts, always with an ear tuned to the sounds of approaching soldiers. Food was scarce and often given only as a reward for obedience. Lale had learned to eat quickly, to endure pain without complaint, and to hide tears whenever she could. Despite the suffering, the women began to form bonds. Shared fear created a fragile sense of community. They whispered advice, comforted each other during the worst moments, and held hands to remember that someone else understood their pain. In these small acts, Lale found courage. She realized that even in captivity, the human spirit could find ways to survive. One day, the Mongols announced that some women would be sent to another camp, far from the current location. Panic rippled through the captives. Separation from their friends, from anyone familiar, was terrifying. Lale's mother held her close, whispering that they would survive together, even if they were sent apart. Lale clung to the words, knowing that hope, no matter how fragile, was essential. The silent suffering continued, day after day. Women worked, obeyed, and endured. Their lives were stripped of choice, but not entirely of dignity. Each girl who managed to keep her spirit alive, each mother who comforted a child, was a small act of defiance. Even the Mongols, with all their power and cruelty, could not completely destroy the resilience of those they captured. Lale understood that life in captivity was not about freedom, it was about endurance. Every day required strength, courage, and patience. The Mongols had taken their homes, families, and futures, but they could not entirely take their spirit. Survival, even in silence and suffering, became an act of quiet rebellion. And so, as night fell over the camp once more, Lale lay close to her mother, listening to the whispers of other women. She felt fear, pain, and exhaustion, but a small, stubborn spark of determination. She would endure. She would survive. And one day, perhaps, she would find a way to reclaim her life, or at least hold on to the part of herself that could never be taken.
Life in the Mongol camp had become routine, but it was a cruel, exhausting routine. Day after day, Lal and the other captives woke to the sound of hooves, the clatter of armor, and the shouts of soldiers. They worked from sunrise to sunset, performing tasks that left their bodies sore and their spirits weary. Food was sparse, sleep was rare, and every action was monitored. The Mongols had stripped them of homes, families, and freedom. Yet, amid this endless suffering, rare sparks of opportunity sometimes appeared, like small flames in a dark forest. Lal had heard stories whispered among the women, stories of captives who had risen to positions of influence within the Mongol hierarchy. Some had been chosen by leaders for their intelligence, beauty, or courage. These women became more than slaves. They became advisors, confidants, or companions to powerful warriors and even the Khans themselves. Their status offered protection, comfort, and, in rare cases, power. But such stories were exceptions, fleeting moments that highlighted the impossible odds most captives faced. One day, a Mongol officer approached the camp, his horse's hooves striking the ground like distant thunder. He examined the group of women, stopping at each in turn. Some were chosen for labor, others for the warriors' tents. Lal watched as one girl, slightly older and taller than the others, was led away with respectful gestures. Whispers spread through the camp. She was to serve as a companion to one of the Mongol leaders. Her fear was tempered by curiosity, perhaps even hope. She would escape the worst suffering of the camp, but at the cost of her freedom and her old life. Lal wondered what it would feel like to be in that girl's place. The thought brought both longing and fear. Could power or influence protect her, or would it only trap her in a different kind of prison? The Mongols valued obedience, cleverness, and loyalty. A captive who displayed intelligence or charm might gain safety, but at the cost of being forever bound to the conquerors. There was no escape, only survival in different forms. For most, like Lal and her mother, life remained harsh and unrelenting. They were assigned to labor, carrying supplies, cleaning tents, and performing other grueling tasks under the watchful eyes of soldiers. Days were long and punishing, nights offered little rest, and fear was constant. Yet, even in this suffering, the women found ways to preserve small pieces of themselves, sharing whispered stories, comforting each other, and quietly resisting in ways that could not be punished. Lal's mother told her stories of women from her own village who had survived harsh times through cleverness and courage. She spoke of women who had learned the Mongols' routines, understood the soldiers' moods, and used subtle influence to gain small advantages. Lal listened closely, learning that survival often required intelligence as much as endurance. Even amid terror, even when everything seemed lost, the human spirit could find a way to survive. Over time, Lal noticed patterns in the soldiers' behavior. They respected strength, fearlessness, and patience. Those who spoke out, cried too loudly, or disobeyed were punished swiftly. Those who adapted, observed, and endured sometimes found ways to gain small freedoms. Extra food, less grueling tasks, or protection from harsher soldiers. These were rare opportunities, but they existed. And for a captive, any small advantage could mean the difference between life and death. The Mongols' rare rewards were not given lightly. A girl who gained influence had to navigate a delicate balance between obedience and initiative. She had to please her captors while maintaining her dignity and sense of self. Any misstep could lead to punishment, exile, or even death. It was a precarious existence, one that required constant vigilance and emotional control. Lal observed one girl named Farah who had been chosen to serve in the tent of a Mongol leader. Farah carried herself with quiet dignity, obeying orders while speaking only when necessary. Soldiers seemed to trust her, allowing her small privileges, and she even managed to send messages to other captives, sharing information or advice. Lal watched with awe and hope, seeing that courage, intelligence, and composure could provide some measure of safety even in the cruelest circumstances. Yet for every Farah, there were countless others who suffered endlessly. Some were beaten for minor mistakes, punished for crying, or forced into labor that broke their bodies. Families remained separated, and news from home was rare or non-existent. The camp was a place of relentless hardship, where survival required more than endurance. It required cunning, observation, and quiet resilience. Lal began to understand a deeper truth. While the Mongols had immense power, they could not completely control what lived inside the captives' hearts. Fear was constant, but courage, memory, and determination persisted. Each act of care, each whispered story, each small strategy to avoid punishment was a flame that refused to die. Even in captivity, even in suffering,
the human spirit endured. Occasionally, the Mongols would reward loyalty or cleverness with privileges. A woman might be allowed a slightly softer sleeping area, better food, or less hours of labor. For those who received these small benefits, life became somewhat more bearable, but there was always the knowledge that it could be taken away at any moment. Trust was impossible, and every day carried the weight of uncertainty. Despite the hardships, Lal began to learn from the rare examples of captives who had survived through intelligence and courage. She realized that survival was not only about enduring physical labor or avoiding punishment. It was about understanding the conquerors, observing their routines, and using every small opportunity to preserve life and hope. Lal's mother reminded her constantly, "Strength comes not just from your body, but from your mind and your heart. Watch, listen, endure, and remember who you are." Those words became a guide for Lal. Even when exhaustion threatened to break her, even when fear seemed overwhelming, she held on to the knowledge that survival was a form of resistance. And in rare moments, when the camp was quiet, Lal allowed herself to imagine a life beyond captivity, a world where families were reunited, cities rebuilt, and freedom returned. These thoughts were fleeting, almost dangerous, but they kept her spirit alive. The Mongols had conquered land, people, and cities, but they had not yet conquered hope. Lal understood that rare flames of power existed even in the darkest circumstances. Some captives could gain influence or protection, but for most, survival required resilience, patience, and courage. Every day she practiced endurance, careful observation, and quiet determination.
The days in the Mongol camp stretched on like an endless desert, each one blending into the next. Lal had learned to measure time by the rising and setting of the sun, the rhythm of the soldiers' patrols, and the sounds of other captives working and whispering. Life was harsh, unrelenting, and terrifying. Yet within this darkness, she found a flicker that could not be extinguished, a spark of human spirit that refused to die. Lal had changed since the day the Mongols had captured her city. She was no longer the frightened girl who clung to her mother in terror. She had learned to endure, to observe, to act cautiously, and to survive. Every moment in the camp was a lesson in patience, courage, and resilience. Every glance, every word, and every small act could mean life or death. Yet even in these small, controlled moments, Lal began to feel a sense of purpose. Survival was not just physical, it was emotional and mental. To live was to resist, even in silence. The Mongols continued their relentless campaigns, moving through cities and towns, conquering, destroying, and reorganizing the world around them. Captives were transported, traded, married, and enslaved, their lives reshaped by forces beyond their control. Lal saw families torn apart, girls separated from mothers, fathers executed, brothers enslaved. Yet amid this destruction, she also witnessed small acts of defiance, whispers of comfort, shared bread, and a hand held to calm fear.
These moments reminded her that humanity persisted even when the world sought to crush it. One evening, as the camp settled under the dim glow of torches, Lale sat with her mother and a few other women, sharing what little food they had managed to save. The conversations were quiet, careful, yet they carried strength. They spoke of memories of home, of cities before the invasion, of gardens, rivers, and streets filled with laughter. Each memory was a lifeline, a reminder that their world had not entirely been lost, and that their identities remained intact, even if their freedom had been taken. Lal reflected on the rare captives she had seen gain influence. Women like Farah, who navigated the Mongol strict control with intelligence and composure. They had survived by understanding the conquerors, using small opportunities to secure protection, and finding ways to influence decisions without revealing weakness. Lal realized that survival required more than endurance. It required observation, cunning, and courage. It was a skill, a strategy, and a quiet rebellion against the relentless control surrounding them. The nights were the hardest. Sleep came in short bursts, often interrupted by the cries of other captives, the bark of soldiers, or the clatter of armor. Fear never fully left, but Lal learned to coexist with it, to keep it contained while focusing on the small actions that could keep her alive. She watched the soldiers carefully, noting which ones were more patient, which could be appeased, and which brought danger. Every day was a lesson in survival, every interaction a test of judgment. Despite the harsh conditions, Lal noticed how the human spirit persisted. Mothers comforted daughters, sisters supported each other, and the oldest women offered guidance to the young. Even when the Mongols were cruel or violent, these small acts of care and solidarity were acts of quiet defiance. They reminded Lale that survival was not just about the body. It was about maintaining identity, memory, and hope. The Mongols' conquests had caused immense destruction, yet they had not broken every heart. For those who survived, the lessons of endurance, courage, and resilience became tools for the future. Lal understood that even though they were captives, they carried within them the stories of their cities, their families, and their communities. These stories were treasures that could never be taken even by the most powerful conquerors. Over time, Lal and her mother adapted further. They found ways to make their labor more bearable, shared knowledge with other captives about avoiding punishment, and even learned to negotiate small privileges from soldiers who respected caution and obedience. Each small success reinforced their belief in the possibility of survival, even in the Mongols' world of fear and control. The camp was a world of constant danger, yet Lal discovered that fear could be transformed into strength. Every step she took, every task she completed, was a testament to her determination to endure. She began to realize that survival itself was a victory, a refusal to let the Mongols erase her existence or spirit. Every day lived was a proof that even in captivity, human courage, resilience, and spirit could flourish. The Mongols had tried to conquer everything: cities, families, and people's sense of self. But Lal knew the truth. They had not conquered the spirit.
That flame, fragile yet fierce, continued to burn within her and the women around her. It was a quiet, enduring defiance that no sword, no captivity, and no conqueror could fully extinguish. And so, in the flickering light of torches, surrounded by the echoes of sorrow, labor, and whispered prayers, Lale embraced her fate. She would endure. She would survive. She would remember. And in surviving, she carried forward a spark of hope, a proof that even in the darkest times, human courage, resilience, and spirit could remain unbroken. For every captive, every woman torn from home, every life reshaped by the Mongols, there was a story of survival, a story of fear, endurance, and quiet rebellion. Lale's story was just one, but it was a story of strength, memory, and the unyielding power of the human spirit. And though the Mongol shadow stretched far and wide, the flame of hope in the hearts of those who survived would continue to burn, quietly, fiercely, and eternally.